co-founders of Telos, which started out making phone hybrids and moved up into high-end. They make consoles now and video and TV.
We have
Other
some
stuff.
of their ancient phone systems, and when I bought,
You're live now, just so you know. You can talk.
no, I'm getting what we just talked in my ears.
Just turn your YouTube feed back. Your YouTube is feeding back
Yeah.
into your headsets.
There we go. So, yes, we have some Telos equipment.
That's good.
Ancient
It's funny.
Telos
There's like people like Omnia or Orban. It's like they like one or the other, and they both have their ups and downs. I prefer Frank's stuff, mainly because I know Frank and I've known him for years. Bob Orban, don't know him so well. I think he's
He
retired
was at
now.
NAB.
Yeah, they're all there. They just finished up IBC.
GMD has an Orban.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it. It's a great box.
USX has something else.
Probably, what kind of a console do you have at USX?
We don't.
Wheatstone?
It's the same. Well, we have everything pipes through GMD. So
Okay.
it's the Wheatstone at GMD.
Yeah, Wheatstone makes a processor called Vorsys. So it's either like Omnia, Vorsys, Orban,
Yeah,
and
so we
there's a
have
few others.
Yeah, or at WGMD, there's an Orban for WGMD. At this transmitter at USX is something from Spain, maybe something from Europe.
Oh, let me
USX
think.
that Adams had
DaVinci?
bought.
Is a DaVinci audio system? Spain. I hope it's not Tissechi, because Tissechi sucks.
It may be. I don't know where it's in Europe somewhere.
Yep. A few here and there. So you guys excited? Excited for today?
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right, good to hear.
I mean, I'm looking at a list of your previous guest, and there's some big names up there.
Yeah, there are. We have some. You know what's strange is there aren't a lot of shows that can feature broadcast people. Essentially, the one that might come closest is Twerk, which is Kirk Harnax. But we've had Kirk on this show. But there's not many of them that cater to the broadcast industry. There's a lot of older, burned out DJs like me that are doing radio shows as podcasts, but that's about it. Would you call me burned out, Alex?
No, I don't think that's fair.
Oh, that's kind of you to say that. Thank you. Don't you hate it when people fish for compliments? He should have said, "Absolutely, you are. You're horrible. You're a poster child for burned out radio guys." And I don't see any chatters up there on the chat master.
Oh, sometimes people are quiet. We've got 8 people looking at it so far.
9 now. And we're up to 121 subscribers, slowly growing. It's all good. The window that you see the countdown going on there, Mark, is the actual live going out to YouTube.
Got it.
Beauty Bubble is in the chat.
Beauty Bubble. We don't know what kind of a pronoun to throw your way, Beauty Bubble. Is that on purpose?
Don't think too hard about it, Mitch. It doesn't really matter.
I worry about all that doodah. That was the thing that taught me on office hours, is to get the pronouns right.
Just a bit of technical things that I've been thinking about over the last week. I'd like to try testing, even though all the sources coming in here are 1080p, I'd really like to test a 4K stream after seeing what Extra Hours is doing with their stuff. The upscaling to 4K looks noticeably sharper, so very curious to see how Mimo Live's upscaler looks in 4K, see if we can squeeze just a smidge more sharpness out of the picture.
I would ask Oliver to see what he says.
That's what I got to
do. Know. He's got the codecs that they're using. Usually garbage in, garbage out. You know, it's like if it's not great going in, it's not going to be great coming out of it. It's like with Photoshop. If you take a picture and you resize it to much larger, it's going to look crappy. You have to turn it into their, what do they call it? Not content aware, smart raster or whatever it's got a name. I forget what it is. You have to keep, it has to be in the digital domain before you rasterize it.
Or you could just keep resaving the same photo over in JPEG after JPEG after JPEG and watch it compress itself down to nothing.
Yeah, we used to do that with a Xerox machine. It'd be like, crazy stuff. 4 minutes. It's got my stupid Rickroll stuck in my head. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
So, Mitch, this week in Discord, some of your messages, I'm not sure I fully understand what you were posting. You posted an image of a teleprompter on a stand, and I'm not sure why.
It's actually not just the teleprompter. That's the Ivy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a system that friends of ours in office hours are helping to distribute. But it's a single-piece device that's a camera, it's audio, it's like you hook it up to Zoom, and you can do it all just in the one little box. Go to Ivy or myiv.com, IVI.
Okay.
If you're interested.
See, that was the part cool that I was missing. I didn't know where that came from.
No context. I just thought that all things office hours, you would have that on the tip of your tongue.
No, I just had no idea what you were talking about. I'm like, okay, what is this?
Hey, what is this? This thing here, what is that? By the way, good job on office hours on Saturday. I tracked you doing the reading.
Well, I don't read. This Saturday? I hosted Saturday.
Oh, you did? I thought you were reading.
No. I've been hosting Saturdays now.
Then I must have looked at maybe it was Friday's show. Gosh, I don't know.
Friday, probably, yeah. Most days I read it. Yeah, I'm trying to host Wednesdays, at least the first hour, audio Wednesday, and then Saturday.
Right. Cool. 2 minutes, approximately. Beauty Bubble says that, Lord, I am such a woman. It's ridiculous. See, I don't know if they're spoofing me or not. I'm just going to assume yes, because you answered my question. So, welcome, Beauty Bubble. All right. Here we go. See, Mark's going to get his telestrator in there. Warn us before you do that, because if he's got a 2-up or a 3-up, it won't show up in the screen.
I probably won't use it.
Yeah, you're welcome to. Just give us a heads up.
I lost the pen. No.
Use your finger.
It doesn't work. I've tried. Been there, done that.
All right, everybody break a leg.
We
Now we're
already
up to
made
12.
it to the stage.
12 people. We're happy to have you all.
Stand by.
In a vast wasteland of entertainment where radio has become obsolete, stands an embittered man teetering at the edge of sanity. With help from radio friends, he's about to embark on a global mission that would change the course of history as we know it. Broadcasting live from the secret studios on the banks of the Brandywine River in Delaware is Mitchell K.C. Hill. And up to the Great White North in Vancouver is Alexander Knight.
And here we go once again. It's great to have you all here, wherever you happen to be. Back to that was back to Alex. That was sort of a sneaky shot in there of Alex showing up. But anyhow, we're at show number 32. We got a great guest who's been here before, and we'll talk a little bit about him in just a second. But I just want to once again welcome you all here. It's like getting to be a regular thing. It's a regular thing for the people to come in and watch the vodcast version of our show, which is live, and we invite you to talk to us. And I'm always happy to once again recognize the producer of the show and our head tech, Mr. Alexander Knight. Alex?
It's good to be here, Mitch. As always, episode 32 of The Last Angry DJ. You know, the news media said, if these guys get past 2 episodes, we'll be shocked. And we're still here. So it's good to be
What
here.
News media? What news media said that?
Yeah, exactly.
Tucker Carlson was on our case again?
Right.
What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Thanks, Alex. Appreciate that. Our guest today is somebody we keep referring to all the time as our poster child for owning their own radio station. In the world of broadcasting, there's like a handful of major companies that own all of the turf out there. You know, iMedia, Odyssey, all Entercom used to be them, I guess. And there's a handful of what did you refer to them as single stick owners that are what we like to refer to as mom pa owners. And this particular person happens to be the name of Mark Giuliani, who's a good friend of ours, a good friend to Office Hours. And Mark owns a couple of radio stations in lower Delaware, southern Delaware. Mark, welcome aboard. Great to have you here. We love talking to you about the challenges of owning your own radio station as opposed to working for that giant world conglomerate machine that makes all the decisions in some other place somewhere else. So thanks for being here with us today.
Well, it's great to be here, Mitch, Alex. It's good to be here, and I feel that honored to be in, one of the guests. You've had some great guests on talking about radio. So thank you very much for having me back.
And, one of the reasons we're going to have you back, or we have you back, is that we're very curious at how this show, The Last Angry DJ, affects you as a radio station operator. I think the challenges that we, constantly bring up and talk about and machinate over, I used the word machinate, by the way, is how does somebody survive in a very competitive world of broadcasting today as an individual owner? And that's what you are. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about is like, what kind of innovation are you doing? I know you have the passion for the business. I know you kind of came up through the ranks. Maybe if you give us a little bit of history of how you ended up being a radio station owner, that would give us sort of a perspective on how you are where you are today.
Great. Okay. Well, it all started many years ago. In 1980, my father and Joe Giuliani and a guy named Gene McCoy, who was his best friend, and another person from the radio industry, David Shoemaker, who grew up in radio under Walter Cronkite, then went to ABC News in New York. They got together and started buying radio stations. And much later on, around 2015, as they were in their 80s and almost 90s, they came to me and said, we want you to start looking at managing the radio stations. At the time, and still today, I'm the president of Giuliani Associates, which is an architecture and engineering company. So not a lot there about radio in my background. But I started going down, and David took me under his wing, and I learned a lot about radio. I learned a lot about radio from the team there, from Walt, who you guys know, who's our engineer. And I learned a lot from Office Hours, from this show. And it really, what I learned, which is quite interesting, is that we're not really a radio station so much as we are a marketing company. And that we help the small businesses build brands. And the importance of that is that radio, as we are as a small business, is really run by the advertising dollar, but you need listeners. As a small radio station, without the reach of the big people, the big groups, we have to basically know our audience. What is our audience? Our audience is people in the community. So we have to be local. We have to talk about local radio, but there's only so much to talk about in local radio. So you also bring the national in. So it's been a an interesting journey, but it's been a fun journey. It's been a lot of there's been a lot that's been learned and a lot we've tested. We've been able to bring so much into radio that wasn't there before, just because of my background's a little bit different.
Yeah, your background isn't in broadcasting; it's in architectural design, right? And
Right.
you've sort of skate on both rinks, wear different hats, and I think it brings a unique position to your interest in broadcasting, because I think a lot of people in the broadcasting industry, particularly the small stations, the individual owned and operated stations, they're a little bit jaded. They feel that, hey, it worked for us in the 80s and it's going to work for us today. Well, that's not the way it works anymore. So you kind of came in with a fresh attitude and a lot of passion and maybe a few dollars here and there to make this all happen. And I've followed your career directly and indirectly because I live in the same state that your radio stations are, albeit I'm in the northern part of the state, you're in the southern part. But I recognize the challenges up here in Newcastle County, Delaware. There's like 3 FM stations, and one of them's a religious station. So there's like no competition between them. They all have a very clear-cut competition. But down in your neck of the woods, downstate, you're very close to Salisbury, Maryland, other areas right over the Jersey, over the Chesapeake Bay into New Jersey. So what is it, like 20-some radio stations you're competing with?
So we are considered the Salisbury market, even though we're probably 40 miles northeast of Salisbury, and we are market 134. There are, last time I checked, 46 radio stations in our market, which is more than New York City, and so it's very competitive.
So you're getting, you're drinking from the fire hose, essentially, when it comes to broadcasting. And the only way you can compete today, in my opinion, I mean, we've talked about it before, is you can't do what the big boys are doing, which have these national programmed and cultivated programming, and all the decisions are made somewhere else. The way you compete is you have to be hyper local. You'll hear that term a lot. So how you doing with hyper local down in Lewis and Rehoboth and Salisbury, Maryland?
So I think we're doing very well in our local market because we mix it not only with local, but we do bring in some of the national syndicated shows. But out of all the news talk formatted stations in the country that I've heard, I think we keep up with some of the more, reliable ones, or the more better known ones. And by that I mean we're on the air live and local from 5 to noon, Monday through Friday, and then noon to 3 we have syndication come in, and then we go back to live and local from 3 to 6. And then we go back to live syndicated. So we have each one of our stations, Monday through Friday, has 10 hours of live local radio. And so that's 20 hours of live local in around the Salisbury market. And then the rest of it's live, 20 hours of live radio, 20 to 22 hours, depending on the day, on our stations, which is, it's unheard of, I think, in the industry to have that much live radio.
Yeah, and the other challenge is that being hyper local, you have to serve your audience. And here's the other big challenge: is that Rehoboth, Lewis, Dewey Beach. I was trying to say Dewey and Lewis at the same time. Also, is a resort town. So you've got all this influx of people coming in from Maryland, Northern Virginia, and it's also the beach capital of the Washington, D.C. So you get this huge influx of people coming from different walks of life. How do you program for that? That's got to be quite a challenge to be able to, and it's seasonal, and to some degree. It's less seasonal nowadays, but how do you deal with that mixed bag of audience?
It's interesting. So I would say that before COVID, it was very transitional during the summer. But since COVID, a lot of the people from Philly and Washington and Baltimore have bought homes down there and stay down there. So when I first started going down there were a ton of farm fields, lots of farm, lower, slower Delaware is really a huge market for the chicken industry. And so there were lots of cornfields to grow corn for the chicken and soybean and such. And a lot of that has been converted to housing. So there's a lot of listeners that are there year round. So it hasn't been as much of an issue recently as it was in the past.
Yeah, I wish I had bought a few beachfront properties in Dewey when I used to go there in the 80s, because there was a time when the city wasn't even incorporated. And if I'd bought a house for, some, 100,000 or something, today it'd be worth $1.5 million with hardly any taxes. It's just kind of crazy. So it's an interesting market. And I guess the question is, if you are like an independent programmer, you are one, how do you compare to other independent programmers and other radio stations in other markets, maybe the same size? You're almost in the top 100.
Right. So I don't know how we compare to them because we're always trying to improve ourselves, which sometimes means you don't pay attention to your competition because you're focused on improving what you do. And in the mornings, we have interviews with lots of the local pertinent people in the marketplace. So we'll have businesses come in, we'll talk to them, we'll talk to the listeners about what it is those businesses do. We have representatives from the community come in, whether it be DelDOT or local representatives, local senators come in and take live phone calls. And I mean, so you're able to get one-on-one as a listener and ask questions, and that's how we get out. Then from 9 to noon, we go to a national show where we're really utilizing tools that haven't been used in radio before. They're more event tools, which allow us not only to take calls, which radio, news talk radio has been interactive for years because of the phone calls, but now we have people who are asking questions, voting on questions, chatting with each other, chatting with the guest, chatting with the host, live in real time. And it really has transitioned the radio and made the shows move a lot more smoother rather than waiting for phone calls or screening phone calls and the things of the old news talk radio.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because back in my days of radio, it was the only interaction you had was the phone, the request line. And we'd put them on the air occasionally, and that was it. But I'm glad you brought this up, because I think this is an interesting subject, and it's also part of the revitalization process for radio, especially as I think and I suspect that a lot of those big box owners out there that are struggling to make ends meet are going to start peeling off some of their, smaller market stations, which means that potential owners like Mark here could start scooping them up and operating the way Mark is. They can't. Your competition at iHeart, for example, or at Odyssey, they can't do the same thing you're doing, because it would just be such a heavy lift for them, personnel-wise, to be able to serve their market that way. They're so used to being able to spread that expense over a broader market by doing nationally syndicated programming. But if you're serving a local market, you have to put the infrastructure in there to be able to do that. So I think you're in a pretty good position.
I think that the big players have forgotten who the audience is or what the audience wants. What they've done is come in with people from outside the industry that run businesses, and they've done what those people know how to do. They've stripped radio businesses down to nothing and tried to spread the cost across as much as they can to reduce that overhead and get as big a return as they can. In order to do that, they spent a lot of money buying stations that weren't really worth the money that they were paying for.
So the valuation back in the 90s, when all these companies were buying up stations lickety-split everywhere, exceeded their grasp. And like so many big corporations, they're in trouble now trying to meet that debt.
Right. They have huge debt obligations. And as a result, they're trying to just make every penny go as far as it can go without really paying attention to what it is they do. What is radio when you strip it down? It's communication, it's community. You take transmitters out, take the antennas out, take all the tools out. It's all about communicating with the audience and having an interactive conversation and bringing as many people to that conversation as possible. And that's what we're doing. One of our shows in the afternoon is Your Turn, Delmarva. So people call in, talk about that topic, and that show probably gets 40 phone calls within 3 hours, which is a lot for talk radio.
I was going to say, is that good for a smaller market? Yeah, that's good to hear. And I think you're making an observation, and I think that someday we got to get some of these big boys on this show so they can defend themselves. But it's a typical corporate move to have the bean counters and the CEOs of corporations in general, I don't care if you're making loaves of bread or broadcasting, is that you're trying to maximize your bottom line dollar so that you can sell the station or keep the valuation high so that when, some kind of you keep seeing these companies where CEOs are selling off big sections of the company, like it's happening to restaurants now. And somebody's making a lot of money on that. And a lot of them are CEOs of those corporations or venture capitalist organizations. They're just doing the Wall Street move on it. So it's interesting that they don't have the passion for the business the way you do. That's what I'm saying.
And I look at it a little differently than trying to see how much money can this business make. To me, it's more about growing other businesses. Here we have an opportunity to teach the community about other businesses in our community and build those brands and make those businesses be successful. And when that happens and you do that, that's a great feeling. And so that's what we've been able to do for a lot of our businesses is really help them grow, become top of mind, and become something that people know. When you talk about a product or service, they're the businesses that advertise on our stations, the community knows about.
Well, that's a good point because something that's true in radio is that your salespeople generally have contact with a potential advertiser. Let's say it's a car dealership, or maybe it's a high-end restaurant, or whatever it is. The person that has control of that client determines where they're going to spend their advertising dollars. So it's not unusual for a salesperson, at least in the smaller markets, a salesperson to control that particular retail advertiser to the extent that not only are they selling product from their station, but they're also advising on billboards and print media and TV and things like that. So how does that extend out for you? Does that seem to be playing out that way?
Yes, it is playing out that way. And what we're doing, that's what earlier we commented that we're really a marketing company that just so happens to own radio stations. And so what we want to do is help companies build their brands. And that means that if radio doesn't work, we're going to find something else that might. That may be digital, it may be billboards, it may be OTT, it may be a lot of different things. But we want to help them make their branding and their marketing consistent across all those various platforms so that they can grow their business and get a higher return on investment.
You just said digital, and I want to make sure that people understand it isn't digital audio, it's digital content. How do you extend what radio does other than just being a stick broadcasting a signal, it's a distribution system essentially? How do you go beyond that to be digital content? Like, explain to me what it is that you're offering as your product.
Well, when I first heard digital, I think most people in the industry referred to it as HD radio or RDS or something like that. And in my mind, digital is how do you get the media out there? And radio's always been broadcast, it's been analog, but what is available today allows us to take that same radio signal, add a picture to it, and go into multiple platforms in multiple areas. So our reach extends further. Our ability to get directly to different places extends, and we can go through multiple platforms, much like you're doing here today. We have set up not only, Your News Talk America, which is one of our shows on realnewstalk.com. Then we have industrynewsonline.com, which is all about industry news. And then we have the Talk of Delmarva and the talkofdelmarva.com, which is the original WGMD. And so that reaches Delmarva and talks about the interest of Delmarva.
And we're kind of getting into your territory, Alex, because now we're talking about not just a radio station, we're talking about other content and other products. How do you see radio? I mean, has anything got your attention with maybe the interactivity of it? Maybe it's adding video as a component. They kind of started out with the morning shows. How do you see radio sort of expanding into this territory?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's not a lot of people that I'm just trying to think. Is there one example I can think of other than Mark and what he's doing? Probably not. The only other one that I know of is what Howard Stern is doing, but he's not on terrestrial anymore. He's on Sirius XM. And so they're able to do, I think, a lot of things that you perhaps wouldn't necessarily be able to do. Obviously, they can say stuff that they couldn't say on terrestrial radio, because you got the FCC chasing you for F-bombs and that kind of stuff, and other content that maybe certain things that you can't say. But I think what Sirius XM is doing, as far as, if I look at their overall strategy of social media content, and they weren't always good like this, but they've gotten better over the years with getting more short form content cut up from the Howard Stern show, because they've been filming it for decades, right? But just getting those clips out from the current show on Instagram and YouTube, for example, you can just see what they're doing there and look at all the engagement that they get on those posts. So I think that's really the way to go now, is that if you're going to be doing video production, I think you've got to aim pretty high, I think, if you're going to be doing video production. Otherwise, don't do it at all, right? Because then it looks just mediocre, and who's going to want to watch that, right? If the show isn't done well, right? I wouldn't want to watch it. I mean,
Well,
you've got to,
people are
basically,
jaded.
what I'm saying is you're competing with YouTubers right now, right?
Yeah, right. And I was going to say,
that's who you're competing with.
That if you have a sub level quality of production level on your program, I don't care what it is, people are very sophisticated in what they're used to seeing. They're used to seeing broadcast TV, cable TV, all of those doing a pretty good job of not a great job, but a pretty good job of broadcasting their programs. And in the beginning, radio was abysmal because they would throw a camera in the morning zoo, and that would be their idea of video. And you got to be more sophisticated than that. So to Alex's point, I'm very interested to see how radio continues to expand into that digital world that Mark was just talking about. Mark?
But I think what's interesting, Alex, that what you've talked about with XM or Sirius XM is that they don't have a tremendous lead for listeners. And in fact, a lot of the listeners they have are using those free trials for 30 days or 90 days or whatever it is. And then their listenership falls off.
Right.
But what's really interesting about it is the fact that what you just mentioned, other than the Howard Stern show, how many shows do they have where people call in? And the only way that people can be interactive is by calling in. And what I'm talking about is adding that whole website basis to it, where you're chatting, you're communicating, you're asking questions, you're voting on questions, and you can see the picture in the center. So I think there's plenty of room for radio to really grow into the digital.
Oh, I totally agree. And to be clear too, for those maybe that don't know exactly what you're talking about, what Mark is talking about is having a modern web-based application that is a Q&A platform. And it's an all-encompassing platform where people can submit questions, they can vote on questions, which help drive the show. They can chat with other people. There's not a lot of really good tools for that kind of thing. And that's obviously changing how you work, Mark, and perhaps maybe that will catch on with a lot of these older companies. And basically what I look at as legacy media is, are they going to adopt this kind of thing? Are they going to, and actually one thing I just want to say about call-ins, I still think that they're important in radio. I know a lot of people always go, the audio quality is terrible. We expect things to be on the level of broadcast with YouTube and that kind of thing. But the reality is that the average person, you can't send a microphone to every single person that listens to your show, right? That's really, it's not practical and it's expensive. So obviously for guests that matter, you're going to send them kits. But
with Facebook audio, everybody that has an iPhone or even a Android phone has higher quality audio than they're used to having on a telephone, on a POTS phone, a plain old telephone.
But that even FaceTime audio, I totally agree with you, Mitch. It's better audio quality, noticeably. But even FaceTime audio, that's still a fraction. You're assuming that everyone's got an iPhone on top of that, and then it's how do you pipe the FaceTime audio into the station? That's something Mark could probably speak to because he's dealt with that before.
So
Mark,
guys
do you have any comments about FaceTime?
Yes, that poor call quality is called character and charm. That's what makes radio what it is.
So you have a teletype running in the background too? Just
yes,
to add
actually we do
quality?
have a sound effect that is a teletype running in the background.
Do people understand what the hell that is?
Yes.
I mean, it was normal back in the day. We'd have a,
the
ladies and
teletype
gentlemen,
sound
all the
effect
ships at
plays
sea,
during the
flash.
news.
Yeah, exactly. And it was crazy, crazy noise. And some people still do that? You're telling me that they still run a teletype?
No. We just have the sound
Okay, I was
effect.
going to say that.
So to Alex's point, when we have guests come in, we try and get them to come in through Zoom because the call quality is so much better. The other thing that's interesting, at least where we are, Verizon came through, or a phone company came through and pulled all the copper. So the only thing we have coming in is a digital line. And so now you have to have equipment converting that digital back to analog so that it goes through the old phones, the old radio system equipment, and you lose a lot of quality there.
Well, there's a thing called HD audio now for phone calls. You can upgrade. It's just an app that they can throw a switch. I don't know all the details, Alex. You should do the investigation. And then there are companies like Tyline and Centrex and Telos that make devices that take advantage of that extra bandwidth. And it's, if somebody's holding an iPhone this far away from their voice, it's a pretty good signal. It's not horrible or great, but it's better than, the old, would you like fries with that? It doesn't work like that anymore. So that issue of quality of sound, I think, is slowly disappearing in favor of a much more, like the Zoom call we're doing right now. This was something that used to take satellites. God bless them. We used to have to bounce our signal off a satellite in order to have this quality of a conversation and add video to it. I used to do my show from down at Disney World at the MGM studios down there, and we were on satellite. And dealing with that 2-second delay was a pain in the ass. But nowadays, Zoom does it all. And you can do it with Teams. And there are other apps that I think are out there. You'd have to ask your technical guys to be able to do that. So we're taking steps to make it more interactive and the quality to be something that you would, be happy to listen in your car. You're driving around in your Mercedes Maybach, and you're going to want to have those phone conversations sound like pristine, especially if you have a high-end guest on there. So all of that is moving in the right direction. But I think the thing that I want to point out that Alex was saying, technology that's being just now being made available that allows people to interact directly by asking questions and managing those questions and maybe adding voice notes to them. That is big. That is real big. And I think that's part of that digital content you were talking about, Mark.
I think so. I think real quick in the chat, so Shoji is asking what our format is, and both the stations are news talk stations. And so they mostly, it's, as I said earlier, it's 10 hours a day on each station of live and local broadcasting, and then we syndicate out to different news talking head people, Mark Levin, Rob Carson, things like that.
So,
like
Mark,
that.
You got 2 radio stations down there. I'm going to start asking the tough questions now. How come one of them's not music? What's the thinking behind that?
Well, my thought behind that was that people that listen to music have playlists, and they have many different alternatives to listen to music. And it's very hard to keep the community involved when you're just playing music. If you have the opportunity for the community to call in and have interactive radio, the format to do that really is news talk.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. But here's a strange thing. I'm going to throw this out there. A lot of people will say and think one thing, and then in reality, they mean something else. And it was like what was the song, 200 Channels and Nothing On? It's like that with music and all these, Pandora and Spotify and Apple Music and Yahoo, and every one of them have their own streaming service. I think what research is beginning to show is that people love the idea that they have that choice of thousands of songs instead of hundreds of songs in their playlist. But in reality, I think here's the big pointer. I think a lot of people like the idea that somebody else is curating that list and picking what they want to hear. Alex, you kind of agree with that? Do you think that people would rather have the surprise of somebody that's an expert?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I think it depends. I think that, yes, some people like the professionally chosen playlists, so to speak. A lot of it depends on the market. In our particular case, there's 40 other stations playing music. So it's tough to get in and compete in that type of marketplace. But I think what really differentiates radio from many of the other platforms that are out there are the personalities. So even if it is music, if you have a host that's that knows a little bit about the music that's being played and can talk about the music and bring the community into that music and answer questions on the bands and things, then yes, that makes all the difference in the world.
I think we would agree with you. I think Alex and I have talked about this before, and some of Alex's mentors in broadcasting are doing exactly that. Wouldn't you say, Alex, that some of your very knowledgeable radio people are talking about the music they're playing and giving us some insight?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Larry Hennessy, who we had early on the show, who made a massive name for himself on the Larry and Willie show on CFox. He's doing a show now where he's bringing his own vinyl records. He's playing it on the radio, and he's talking about these artists. And some of these artists are, not very well known, esoteric, and it's kind of fascinating to discover, who is this? Who is that? And then you write this down, and you go find the artist, and you listen to it. Maybe you like the track, maybe you don't like the track, but it's kind of, I kind of like that, because to me, it's not just about the music, it's the storytelling aspect. And if you can do that well, to me, that's interesting. I want to hear that part of it.
Yeah, that's cool. I actually, in the 90s, when I got back on the radio for a while, I was toying with the idea of doing a 2-hour show. It was called Mitch's Dewey Beach Blast. And Dewey Beach is an area in Mark's territory down there. And I thought that people might be interested in what was the big deal when it was Dodge City down there, and it was like a Western. We circled our wagons. We were crazy kids, and we did all that. Now, today, that would be bad, because if you're talking about the 80s, just imagine, do the math, and figure out the average age of the people that might listen to that. They might be in their 60s plus, going up that way. But it was the idea was that talking about the whole experience and the music that played and what the significance of that and what the words LGFC meant and what was the Bottle and Cork Sunday Jam session and what was the Waterfront and what was the Renegade. I mean, all the crazy stuff that went on back then. To me, I get excited about it because, well, I can talk great about the way it used to be. But the problem is, from a financial standpoint, I don't think it'll make sense because too many of the people who'd be listening to it would be way too old, and the younger ones are like, what? They did what? Our parents did what? It was like, anyhow, it was a crazy time. So I do think that if you were to go to something music-wise as a format, no matter where it is, whether it's downstate Delaware or anywhere else for that matter, that what the thumbs up vote here is going to be, talk about the music, make the content, because if you're channeling some old-time disc jockey, that's not quite going to cut it anymore, because today's listeners are a little more sophisticated. What else, Alex, would you like to hear on a music-formatted radio station, particularly one that's hyper-local?
Yeah, I think getting artists, getting well-known artists on the station, if they're good at storytelling, getting those kind of people in to do like an hour or a couple hours and just talk about their own favorite artists, like what, who influenced them, how did those artists impact their own style and how they wrote music. I love that kind of thing. And, there's too many that I can't really name, but I do remember listening to CFox back in the day, and they would definitely bring in people like that. And that were good about talking about the past and who they were influenced by. So I like stuff like that.
Let me run a quick test. Let's say I came on the air and I was bringing in a 60s or 70s artist. Let's say I brought in Foghat, and I know Roger Earl real well out Foghat. He's the lead singer and one of the founding members of the band. And would people be curious about the music they played back then? It's not all just slow ride, but maybe they'd be interested in, what are you guys doing now? Or what do you think of Lady Gaga or Taylor Swift? Or where did AC/DC go? Or I could bring in Mike Panera, who was the lead singer of Ride Captain Ride, the Blues Image group. Do you think that would stretch that far to today's current listeners? Plus, the old folks would buy into it, I guess.
Well, let me tell you a little something that we do that kind of goes along these lines is we have the Rehoboth Foodie, who you may have heard of, who he's on Saturdays on our station from 2 to 4, and once a month he takes an hour and he interviews local bands, and they get to tell their story about where they play, what type of songs, and they come on and play a couple songs. And so we do bring the community music. It's just a different way of bringing music than a music station.
Yeah, and I think Delaware Public Radio has a Hometown Heroes program they do that they bring in not charting artists, they bring in local heroes that are performers. So I think people are very curious about that. Whether or not it could support a 24-hour radio station is another matter altogether. But as a specialty show, yeah, that would be interesting. You know, it's funny, a lot of these ideas that are getting a little traction here are very reminiscent of the way radio used to be back in the early days. And when I say early, I mean the 40s and the 50s, where it was block programming. They didn't do one thing. They did a lot of different things. If you were part of the NBC Blue Network, for example, you were getting a taste of all kinds of, like, live concert from the local hotel or, a comedy series or whatever. Maybe block programming has a little future here as far as the hyper-local programming.
Are you
see that a lot.
War of the Worlds?
Yeah, why not? That's block programming of a sort. But that was a big deal on most college radio stations when I was growing up, is that they didn't do one format. And if you go to further up the state, you go to WVUD, the University of Delaware, and it's probably like a lot of universities. They have a whole smattering of different formats. They don't do one thing. They do a lot of things, and they do it pretty well. So they've got a guy on there doing oldies, older than I am, which is like, wow, this is horrible. I wonder if anybody's actually listening to this. And younger people, they do punk rock and crazy things like that, and the influences. I'm curious about all those things. So, do you think, Alex, that block programming would get your attention? Would you tune into a station for a specific show rather than coming back to it all the time, expecting the same thing all the time?
Yeah, I'm very specific now. I don't really like listening to the radio for hours on end. So for me, it's a specific talent that I'm interested in. It's a specific topic. It's a specific format. So I would tune in just for that person. It would have to be a really interesting radio station to entice me to listen to it hours on end. I mean, the thing is, we've changed our behaviors, right? So a lot of things, this is a recurring thing that we come back to on this show, because I see The Last Angry DJ as the intersection between two different worlds. We have the world that Mitch came from, and then we have new media with podcasts, right, and YouTube. And so our behaviors have really changed. And I'm not talking about just like new generation, because, I'm in my 40s now too, but even me, who grew up before the internet even existed, and even before cell phones, my behaviors have changed now. And so I subscribe to, we talked about curation. I curate my own list of YouTube personalities that talk about certain topics that I'm interested in. So it's not like I'm hitting shuffle and just listening or watching, any random YouTuber. That's not really interesting to me. I'm specifically going out and looking for content that answers a problem that I have.
Right? Well, it's a good point, because people's attention are now being drawn in so many different directions. Back in the early days, it was like 3 or 4 radio stations, 3 TV channels, etc. Nowadays, you have so many things vying for your attention that you really don't have time. It's like going to Netflix and trying to figure out, what am I going to watch today? There's thousands of programs, and I got to go digging through them all. It wasn't like I was tuning in to see I Dream of Jeannie or Gilligan's Island. It's like all of these programs are on top of this. So people have changed, and this is one of the questions I wanted to ask, and I'm going to throw it to Alex first, and then I want Mark to answer it. How are today's listeners changed over the years? Like, where are we now with listeners? How do they differ from the way they used to be? Alex, why don't you take that? Or go ahead, Mark. Give it a shot.
Okay. Alex, you want to go?
I'll let Mark go. Sorry,
okay.
I was distracted by something.
So I think everyone on screen right now grew up with a TV guide.
Yeah.
And when you wanted to watch a show, you had to be at a specific place on a specific channel, and then you could watch that show. And you wouldn't see it until a few seasons later in reruns. That's totally changed.
So it was
Now,
very linear back then.
and now my children watch things on demand. They go to wherever they want to go, whatever platform it is, and they watch it when they want to watch it. They don't understand about having to wait until 8 o'clock at night for whatever to start. They just, boom, go and watch it. So I think the audience has changed in the sense that live isn't as important as it used to be. Doesn't mean it's not better. I do like live, but I think people want to be able to watch things on demand.
I 100% agree with that. And it's interesting you say that because, a lot of us do live streams. But I do think that as valuable as on demand is, where I can replay something when I want on my schedule, there is something to that live conversation that's happening right there and then, where I can talk to people and engage with people. And to me, I get a lot of enjoyment. I get a lot of value out of that. To me, it's no different than if I got together with a group of people in real life. We sat down and had a cup of coffee, and we had a really interesting coffee, and we were chatting about different things. To me, that's interesting. It's happening right now and then, and I'm present in the moment there. So I do see a lot of value for live there. And it's interesting too, because, even shows like the other show that I'm on too, Office Hours, some days it's broadcast 7 days a week, but a couple days out of the week, you've got to be there live. Like, it's not recorded. You can't replay it. If you miss it, it's gone. Right. So,
Right.
but I think that's really interesting that,
I think
that we're
the
experimenting with
importance
that.
of live over on demand is that a live production has the opportunity to be interactive, to have the audience participate in it. Once it goes to post and once it goes out to be on demand, you lose the audience participation, and that's where you gain a lot of the value, is the input from the audience.
A good point, Mark, because that's why we do a vodcast, as they like to call it now, live on Sundays at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific, is that we have that liveness of the show, knowing that, we're here live and we're not recording it, and we can't stop the tape and roll back and, do some editing. This is it. What you see, keeping it real. But we're also getting a lot of chat coming in from different people. And while I'm looking over at the chat, Robert Shoji is asking, what are people listening to in their cars? Is it just AM, FM, or are they listening to streaming? I just saw that there's a new format of distribution now that BMW has picked up from DTS that allows a lot more interactivity on the listenership in a car. Seems like the battleground is happening in your vehicle, for where you're going to listen. How do you see it?
Well, here are some statistics that I looked up before the show. What do you guys want to venture the total weekly audience is of radio listeners?
As a percentage?
No, as a number of people.
25 million.
Weekly.
It's got to be a huge number. I mean, it's not as bad as a lot of people think it is right now.
It's not bad at all. It's incredible.
No, I'm saying it's not as a lot of people play it out to be. It's really bad. It's not.
235 million people listen to radio every week.
A lot of folks.
Okay, how many is it for TV? How many do you think listen to or watch TV?
I think it's less than that.
No, it's about the same. It's a little bit more.
You're talking about just regular cable.
No, this is a combination. That's a good point. This is a combination of broadcast and cable, because just the cable numbers are lower than the radio numbers. But if you add the broadcast into that, because they reach so many more people that don't have to pay for the subscriptions, that's a whole nother topic we should talk about. There's 160 million people watching the news over broadcast and cable, and 260 million people watching all of TV.
What do you think the balance between the viewers of, let's say, News Talk on TV versus listening to it on the radio? There's a completely different dynamic there. Where do you think that sits as far as the statistics go?
I don't know how you measure that, but if you just look at these numbers, according to this, 180 million people get their news from TV, and 35 to 40 million people get their news from radio.
Right. And the distinction I'm using is that radio is a helper medium. In other words, you can drive a car and listen to radio.
Right.
You can't drive a car and watch Comcast or some other cable delivered format. You can be home cooking a meal and listening. Sometimes it's more convenient. Yeah. In fact, I would love to do a poll to see how many people are watching this show on YouTube versus just listening to it. That would be an interesting statistic just for us. Go ahead, Alex. You had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, it's a question I want to pose to all of you and the audience, because you hear people say this all the time, that broadcast is dead or it's dying, radio's dead or it's dying, it's not going to last 10 years. And then I hear numbers like this, and I'm astonished by numbers like this. It's not nothing. And I'm not saying that broadcast and radio doesn't have problems. It does, obviously, and they've, fallen by the wayside a little bit. But obviously, there's still a lot of people watching. So I guess the question is, how do you retain interest and engagement? So, because that nothing lasts forever, right?
Right. It's, all technologies go through phases. I think radio, there's a perception out there that radio and TV are dead. But if you look at these numbers, granted, these numbers may be lower than they were 5 years ago. They're still significant numbers. And yes, we have to constantly retool and try to decide how we're going to get people to be interested in what it is, the messages that we're sending out. How do we get them to interact with that? But I think what's important here really is what we just touched base about a little bit earlier, which I think is that people are getting nickeled and dimed through these subscription processes that radio doesn't have. Radio builds a community. It builds the businesses in that community, and those businesses then give back to that community. So there's a little circle there about that community that gets to grow. Whereas the subscriptions to these large companies, that money doesn't help the local community.
Yeah, the people that are running those companies, just examine for a minute. I don't know the actual numbers, but I'm thinking of iHeart was the big daddy out there that owns the most stations. Maybe 80% of the stations out there are owned by them. They're in and out of bankruptcy. The folks at Odyssey just got out of bankruptcy. They might go independent through some venture capitalists. How's that happening? If radio statistics are this good, how is it that these companies that own most of them are doing so poorly as a company, as a corporation? I'll throw that to you, Mark.
Well, obviously, I can't speak for them because I haven't, been exposed to their financials. But as we talked about a little bit earlier, when you had the government change the rules for radio in the 90s, a lot of stations went out to buy, a lot of big companies went out to buy a lot of stations. And I think what probably happened, and I don't know this for a fact, is that those stations became overpriced because you had so many people trying to go and get those licenses. And so the value of those stations became overvalued for what the marketplace was. And now you have, last I heard, iHeart was $10 billion in debt, to not million, billion. And so you've got a lot of stations that are just constantly trying to get rid of this debt. That doesn't mean they're doing poorly.
Yeah.
It just means they have a big debt to pay off. And it's hard when you have that much debt to pay off to bring in talent, to constantly pay for that talent. I think you had a guest the other week who said it's hard for radio to bring people in because they're always turning around and laying people off. So that
was Gary Berkowitz, by the way.
Right. But that's not all, that's a generalization. There's a lot of good stations out there that are doing well and can bring people in. It's just that overall,
I think there's a tendency to, in general, not just this industry, but in general, we tend to always focus on the negative aspects of whatever it is that we're doing. There's the whole moral panic thing, which has become I love that term that Jeff Jarvis has coined, because we always go to immediate moral panic about anything, but the internet and but what's happening to to the industry. But I just want to compare and contrast that data that you just brought up, Mark, with what's happening with YouTube. And I don't know how accurate this is, but I'm just going to read some reporting here from Global Media Insight, because they're talking about YouTube numbers here. Some interesting stats for 2024. So according to the research done by GMI team, over 2.7 billion people worldwide use YouTube per month. As of July 2024, India has the highest number of YouTube users in the world, with an estimated 476 million users. Okay. Now, it's saying that more than 122 million people access YouTube on a daily basis through its web apps and website. Here's another interesting thing, because YouTube is mostly known as a free service, okay? Now, there's YouTube Premium, which is a service you pay for that gets rid of the ads. This is a much higher number than I really expected. It says YouTube Premium and YouTube Music together have more than 100 million subscribers around the world. So think about that. You're paying more than 100 million people worldwide are paying $12 a month for YouTube Premium, which is astonishing. And it really makes me think of, and this is something I've brought up in the past on this show, is advertising, about how people cannot stomach ads anymore, right? And especially on the radio too. And there's no technology for this at the moment. But Mark, what do you think about this? If you could have 100 million people paying you $12 a month to get rid of ads on your radio station, don't you think that'd be a wonderful thing?
No. Because, part of the problem that people have with ads today is that the quality of the ads have gone downhill. Ads can be educational. Ads can tell a story. Ads
True.
can tell you about your community. And that's what a small radio station can do, is tell the story of the community through the ads, tell about the business, tell the history of the business, tell why that business's products are better than the products that you might get from overseas.
Yeah, listen
Or the
to
services for
iHeart.
that matter.
Listen to iHeart and hear most of the ads are national ads. They're either selling reverse mortgages or herbal Viagra or something that has nothing to do with my lifestyle.
Okay, so
here
this
on a local basis.
But
I'm
you
glad
have
you
to
brought this
remember,
up.
a lot of
That's
the
a good
people
point.
out there don't have the money for all these subscriptions.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't have the disposable income to sit there and pay for all these subscriptions.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you brought up, Mark and Mitch, about we should differentiate between the different types of ads that are out there. So you have host read, like the ads that I tend to pay attention to more are the host read ads, which are often on podcasts because I have an established relationship with that host, and I'm more likely to pay attention when Leo Laporte is talking about a product that he's actually tested and he likes and that he supports, as opposed to a dynamically inserted ad that is just absolutely not relevant. If I'm getting an ad about tampons and I'm a man, like, why am I listening to this? I don't really care, right? So I think that thing that you said, Mitch, about these generic ads, they're just it becomes white noise. You're tuning this stuff out.
Yeah, no wonder they're suffering financially. Because that's all they can sell. They can't sell down to a local. I think the technology's out there, Mark, that you can sell your ads into a zip code. It's very interactive, but are they doing that?
Yes, you can do that. We have services that we work with groups that will buy advertising. The way it works, that I understand, is that the agencies that have the digital advertising will bid on the digital advertising, and they'll buy blocks of ads. And then you can work with we work with our clients to find the appropriate place to place those ads. And you can place them using geofencing or geotargeting. There's all different ways to do it. And the research is there that shows you the best way to get that ad on somebody's device, whether it's through Google or Facebook or however. All that can be done. And it needs to be done in conjunction with a broadcast message that reaches that community through multiple neighborhoods, through multiple parts of the demographics. You combine that with the digital ad and the ability to target right down to somebody's phone, and it becomes a very powerful message. But you have to brand all that together, and That's what we're trying to do, is become that kind of company that can bring in a business and build its brand and make it top of mind.
And to put that into contrast, it used to be you'd throw all your money in a bucket and you'd throw it out there to whatever radio station, and the agencies or the decision makers would base it on your cost per thousand. What that simply meant was station A has so many listeners, and if you divide that into the 1,000 per 1,000 people, how much are you paying for that ad? $12, $30, $100, whatever. It should be the same no matter where you are as a consistency. But the value of stations has gone down over the years.
Well, I don't know about that. I will say this. The cost per impression, or 1,000 impressions, on digital is far more than radio. It costs a lot more to do a digital ad campaign than it does through traditional broadcast.
Yeah, and there's also a trend right now, if you look around, that podcasters, which were, there are, I guess, millions of them out there, is sort of falling out of favor with advertisers. They're catching on, saying, wait a minute, this seemed like a great idea. Now we want some real justification for spending that much money to run our ad campaign, run a station all over the world, without any real sophisticated targeting.
How many significant hits are there? I mean, as Alex just said, how many hundreds of millions of people go to YouTube every day? How many of them are going to be your customers? How many of them live in your area? How many of them are interested in what it is, your product or service? Whereas when you come back to a local company that really understands the market, the demo, where to place the ad, what systems to use, that's going to bring you a lot more return on your investment for advertising than just throwing stuff into many different buckets.
That combined with what Alex and I have been talking about for a while here, which is live advertising, where you work the advertising product into the story you're telling, then it becomes informative and entertaining. The way Paul Harvey used to do it. I know I'm throwing a name out there from ages ago, but Paul was brilliant at it. He managed to work a advertising spot into his story. He'd be like, we're driving down the highway with my wife the other day, and we saw this billboard for Burma Shave. It was a wonderful ad, and we were discussing how smooth my face is feeling these days. I mean, just that idea that was worked into the dialogue somehow. It was, I just see you smiling, Mark. I don't know
because
if
it's a live read.
Yeah,
we do a lot of live reads. Yeah, we do a lot of live reads.
And the funny thing about live reads is that I hated them, by the way, because I did not see the point in doing the ad over and over and over again. But when they started giving me talent fees each time it played, I started getting more attention to it. But if you do like a 30-second live read for a customer, the real secret to it is a lot of times it was more like a minute or 35 seconds or 40 seconds because it's not predictable. It's not like you got a stopwatch and you're going, oh, let's see, I'm talking about such and such and I got to finish now. So get some today at your local retail store. You just can't work it out. So I'd say, hey, get live. If you're doing a live show, get the live ads in there.
Well, I think one thing that we haven't talked about, which is very interesting that I learned a lot about coming into this business late, was the ability of the mind to remember audio more than video. And the information that I've read and the studies I've seen describe police detectives going to scenes of crimes, and then after the scene of the crime, studying what was said to them, what the witnesses heard versus what the witnesses saw. And so if the witnesses would describe the color shirt that somebody was wearing, it would be multiple different colors of shirts from the various witnesses. But how many shots were fired? They all knew the number of shots fired. So it's just interesting with radio being audio, how much easier it is for people to remember that brand, or it's just like, what is rice-a-roni?
It's a San Francisco treat.
That's right. Nationwide is
you're in good hands with Nationwide. No, that's Allstate.
With Allstate, but
Nationwide
anyway,
is on.
You
your
remember
side.
when you take
the
audio and music and combine them, it makes it a lot easier to remember it. And as the jingle business went.
Right, or the Geico ads, or whatever ones that are slammed into you in jingles. We'd love to have John Wolford on, by the way, who owns one of the biggest jingle companies in the world. It'd be fun to talk about that dynamic.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting what we're talking about here, because we got a lot of solutions potentially for somebody to try. And Mark, that's why we like having you as a guest, because in some ways maybe we're uncovering certain issues, or stirring the pot a little bit and making you think, I wonder if we did that. Anything we've done on this show caught your attention in particular?
Oh, I think listening to some of the guests that you've had has helped me a lot. It's helped me considerably. I mean, you've had some really good guests talk about the history of radio and why things are and how things got to be where they are. And so, I've benefited a lot from the show. So thank you for having it. Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure to have you on it. One of the problems I think with radio is that radio takes itself too seriously sometimes. They think they're experts on all things. They don't really necessarily play from the numbers, maybe because the old Arbitron-Nielsen system is flawed in its methodology, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Don't necessarily represent those here at the show. But maybe we've just sort of taken ourselves too seriously. And a lot of the people that are programming radio stations, especially the big ones, are still playing by the rules of the 80s when things were great. That was a golden age for making a lot of money on radio. That's when a lot of those companies went out and started grabbing stations left and right, because their valuation was so easy to let's collect all the stations. We're going to control the world, in broadcasting. And now they're stuck with paying off that valuation at a time when radio is under a little bit of stress. So it's very interesting to kick these ideas around. And I honestly think that where you are, Mark, in what you do as a hyper-local, savvy, passionate broadcaster is where the future of broadcasting is going to go. I honestly think you're headed that way. And I think that also what's going to happen is that these stations that are owned by the big conglomerates, and that Communications Act of 1998 that you talked about, where stations were allowed to own more than 4 or 5, they have these giant clusters in different markets, they're going to find they're going to have to let stations go. So there's going to be a glut of radio stations available. Would you buy a station if the price was right in any market?
There's this expression, it depends.
Okay.
And it really depends on the situation, the environment. Yes, would I like to grow what we have and offer more to the community? I think so. Would music be possible? Yeah, music would be possible. But it all depends on what the situation is.
But I honestly think that's going to happen. I think it's going to go through a correction. I mean, isn't that what Odyssey's doing now? They've come out of bankruptcy, a lot of controversy in the government, how they bailed them out, and they're shedding like 200 radio stations in the process of going. I think they're coming off the big board, and they're going to be
my understanding is
owned.
that a company heavily invested into by George Soros went through the FCC, and there was a 3-2 vote down party lines as to how this was going to go through, and they accepted the bid from Soros, from what I understand. I don't know if it's been finalized,
but it's a correction. It's a correction that's happening now, and you just can't sustain operating radio station groups that are in bankruptcy, in and out of bankruptcy. For how long can that happen? It's eventually got to change. And I think a lot of people are too quick to say radio is no longer a viable format and no longer a viable distribution method. And that's not true. That is not true.
It's not true. And there's other industries this happened to. Look at the deregulation of the airlines. Look at all the airlines that went through 3 or 4 bankruptcies before they can get their act together. And it's what happens, I guess, when the government comes in and tries to move things around.
Well, I would say if Spirit was a radio station, would you listen to it, Alex?
Yeah.
Sorry for the tough questions here. That's what makes us what we are,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Hey, a lot of great conversation here, a lot of speculation. We kind of like, we're the armchair quarterbacks here. But, Mark, you're the guy on the front lines. You got to put your money where your mouth is every day. And I would say that there's a very good chance that your competition is watching this show right now as we speak and analyzing everything you've said and say, I wonder what he's going to do next. Some things you just have to keep to yourself. So good luck with that. And whether or not you ever do a music format, if you do a music format, if I'm not asked to be one of your DJs, there's going to be a comeuppance here. I'm going to come and get you personally because I know where you live. I know where you hang out.
Yes,
So
you're going to come down to the beach and get me.
Come down to the beach and get you, pal, because I know where you've been. I've got your all your dirty secrets. But anyhow, it was great to cover this stuff. It does our heart good because we like to think that we ask the tough questions. We consider them all. We're not pouncing on any person. I don't mean to pounce on iHeart. I just think they need a correction. They need to do things in a different manner. And I think Mark is on the target because he's got passion for the industry. And he's willing to put the sweat equity in to move it in the correct direction. And I agree with the whole digital idea, more interactivity. Mark is out there doing video and covering political outings and things. Tell us some of the things that you do, just out of curiosity, that wouldn't typically be done for radio.
We've done quite a few things. We've had town halls. We've done. We've had little chat parties for the different debates that have gone on recently, where we just invite people to come into our software, and we'll pipe in the audio and let people listen to the debate, and then the community's talking. It's become a whole new involvement in the community that we didn't anticipate.
Do you do swap meets? Any swap meets on any of your stations?
What do you mean by swap meets? You mean
what do I mean? Where they're selling something. It's like audio eBay.
Yeah, well, we don't do it through eBay, but you call in and you tell what you want to sell, and people call in and buy it. But
there you go.
They'll call the seller. They don't call the station. But yes, we do have yard sale type shows on the station.
I used to go crazy when we did the Lost and Found for pets. I'd be going, look for Spanky. He's a black Chihuahua mix. He was last seen on 40th Street. It was just like, I think Casey Kasem famously went nuts on one of those lost dogs or dogs that had passed away. So,
we do a lot of community shows. We have a 2-hour law show every week where people can call in and ask legal questions, and we have a lawyer, Giuliani Murray, who responds to those questions. So we have a lot of community shows that we just do, and we because it's interactive.
And Mark, what's the name of that law show?
Tipping the Scales of Justice.
Okay.
And you can watch previously recorded shows on demand on industrynewsonline.com, where you will also find The Last Angry DJ.
Wow, we're happy to be there. Maybe we'll be on your radio station someday talking about something. I think we would like to develop our program to be a little more interactive, and we just haven't hit critical mass of viewers. We have regulars, and we thank them for being here, chatting with us. But I'd like to see more activity on Discord. How many ways can people reach out to us, Alex? Just once again to reiterate what's important.
Yeah, there are various ways, and I'm actually just going to put up a QR code. So if you want to join our online community, I would recommend you join our Discord server. So if you scan that QR code that you see above my left shoulder here, that will invite you into our server where you can chat with us after the show, during the show, and you can talk to us about the kind of things that you want to hear us bring up on the show in the future. So that's one way. And of course, we're on social media. We're on X and Instagram and TikTok by the same name. Facebook as well, if you just look up The Last Angry DJ. Actually, Mitch, there's a couple of other things I wanted to mention too. If you want to support the work that we do on this show, you can go to patreon.com/The Last Angry DJ and become a coffee supporter at $2 a month. That helps us do what we do here. And one other thing, this has been a fantastic conversation, Mark. I really appreciate it. We talked obviously a lot about problems in old media and new media. We've also talked about some solutions that we're currently implementing. I actually just wanted to give a shout out to our friends at Boink Software, because speaking of solutions and problem solvers, Mimo Live is a fantastic application. We could not do this show without Mimo Live. I remember when I first started doing video production and started working with, traditional camera switcher, ran into a lot of limitations with how I could put shows together visually with graphics. And because Mimo Live is software-based, it's really a very different way of working. It's a compositing engine, and you can make this thing look like any way you want, basically. And I've just barely scratched the surface of it, but I wanted to personally thank our friends at Boink Software and Oliver Breinbach for really helping me build out our show template and making the show look good. And we're constantly tweaking it. So this is a work in progress. We're going to test 4K in the very near future as well. So looking forward to doing that. So thanks to Mimo Live as well.
Do people want to see us in surround? So
maybe
that,
one day
you
we'll
can
do
be over here
Atmos
and-
surround. What
I'll
do you think
tell
of that?
That would be, I don't know why we'd want to do that. I mean, mono is still a big thing. I still like mono records on FM. It just sounds great hearing things in mono because the mix is totally different. You don't get all the weird stuff on the side. But anyhow, to what Alex said, all of that is great. And again, it doesn't hurt to hit the subscribe button because we want to see more and more people. We're up to 121 subscribers right now just on YouTube. That doesn't include Apple and Spotify and all those other plethora, I just wanted to use your word again, of services out there. So once again, thank you very much, Mark, for being on the show. I think we asked some very serious questions. Maybe it wasn't all funny, but it was like some very thought-provoking concepts about what's going on in the broadcast industry. I want to point out that next week we have a superstar guest coming on. His name is Frank Foti. Frank is one of the founders. He and Steve Church founded Telos Systems. Started out as a company that made phone hybrids, talk about phones, that plugged into your POTS line and made a great sounding phone. And now he makes everything from audio processing, if you have an Omnia, which I do. I know what an Omnia, I think Mark has a Orban device. It's a big deal in the radio business of how you sound and how you make that sound unique so that when you're tuning up and down, see, I just did that. How many people know, what is he doing with his fingers there? When you're tuning in a station and you go from station A to station B, however you do it, with a push button or a knob or a mouse, one will sound more dynamic and interesting. Frank is the genius. He is the ultimate genius of that. So we're looking forward to having him on our show next week. Anytime you have a guest that you'd like to have us on, reach out to us the way Alex has suggested. And Mark, thanks again. And that will wrap up this program, number 32 of, the naysayers said they'll never go to 32, but here we are, number 32, and it'll be 33 next week. And we've gone every single week. So we appreciate everybody showing up. So thanks again. Everybody be safe out there.